There's a message that's been waiting for you. Not written on paper, not addressed with your name, but meant for you all the same. And Carl Jung spent the last decades of his life trying to make sure it would reach whoever needed it, whenever they were ready to hear it. If you found your way here, in the particular state you're in right now, there's a reason. The message doesn't arrive when you're comfortable. It arrives when something in you has started to crack open just enough to let it through. Jung understood something most people never grasp about their own lives. He believed that beneath the person you present to the world, beneath the roles you play and the name you answer to, there's a second presence. A deeper intelligence that's been watching your entire life, sending you signals, trying to get your attention. He called it the self. And the message it's been sending you, the one you've maybe been feeling for years without being able to name it, is the same message Jung dedicated his life to translating. So today I want to deliver that message as clearly as I can. What Jung actually discovered about the voice you've been ignoring, why it grows louder the longer you resist it, and what it's been trying to tell you this entire time. Because if there's a restlessness in you that won't go quiet, a sense that you were meant for something you haven't touched yet, Jung would tell you that's not a malfunction. That's the message arriving. Let me start with what Jung noticed in the people who came to him. Almost none of them arrived because they were falling apart in obvious ways. Many of them were successful, respected. They had the marriage, the career, the reputation. On paper, their lives worked, and yet they came to him hollowed out, describing a feeling they couldn't explain to anyone else without sounding ungrateful. A quiet, persistent sense that they were living a life that didn't belong to them. Jung recognized this immediately because he'd lived it himself. He'd built a brilliant career, aligned himself with the most famous psychologist of his era, secured his place in history. And then somewhere around midlife, the whole structure started to feel like a costume. He described a period where he genuinely feared for his own mind, where the ground he'd built his identity on turned to water beneath him. What saved him wasn't going back to who he'd been. It was listening, finally, to the part of himself he'd spent his whole life talking over. That's the first piece of the message. The discomfort you feel isn't evidence that something's gone wrong with your life. It's evidence that your life has gotten too small for who you actually are. Think about how this works. When you're a child, you learn very quickly which parts of yourself are welcome and which parts need to disappear. Maybe your curiosity was too much for the adults around you, so you learned to stop asking. Maybe your sensitivity made someone uncomfortable, so you built a harder shell. Maybe your ambition threatened someone, so you learned to shrink. Piece by piece, you assembled a version of yourself that could survive the specific world you were born into. Jung called this constructed version the persona. And here's the trap. The persona works. It gets you accepted. It earns you love and approval and safety. It's so effective that most people spend their entire lives believing the persona is who they are. They never suspect that underneath it, all the exiled parts are still alive, still waiting, still pressing against the walls of the container you built to keep them contained. The message Jung wanted you to receive is that those exiled parts don't die. They wait, and they have a way of making themselves known. You feel them in the middle of the night, when the distractions fall away and something in your chest aches for a life you can't quite picture. You feel them when you watch someone else living boldly, and something in you flares with an envy that's really just recognition. That could have been me. That could still be me. You feel them in the sudden, inexplicable sadness that hits you at moments when you're supposed to be happy, at the party, at the celebration, at the milestone you worked so hard to reach. That sadness isn't ingratitude. It's a part of you standing at the window of the life you built, looking in, wondering when it will finally be let inside. Jung believed these signals were the self trying to correct your course. The psyche, in his understanding, has a built-in drive toward wholeness, the same way a plant bends toward light without being told to. He called this drive individuation. It's the lifelong process of becoming who you actually are, rather than who you were shaped to be. And the message it keeps sending, in 1,000 different forms, is always some version of the same 3 words: come back home. But here's what makes this so difficult, and it's the part Jung was unflinchingly honest about. Coming home to yourself means passing through the very things you've spent your whole life avoiding. The parts of you that got exiled didn't get exiled because they were worthless. They got exiled because they were inconvenient, or threatening, or too much for the people around you. Your anger, your desire, your refusal to go along, your hunger for something more than what you were handed. Jung gathered all of these rejected pieces under a single term, the shadow. And he made a claim that unsettled everyone who heard it. He said the shadow isn't your dark side in the sinister sense, it's your disowned life. It holds not just what's ugly in you, but much of what's most vital, most alive, most genuinely yours. That's why the message is so hard to answer. To retrieve the parts of yourself you buried, you have to go back to where you buried them. And that means feeling the fear that made you bury them in the first place. Imagine someone who learned as a child that having needs made them a burden. So they became endlessly accommodating, the person who never asks for anything, who's proud of how little they require. That self-image feels like virtue. It feels like character. But underneath it, an entire dimension of the person is starving. The part that wants, that reaches, that says this is what I need without apology. Jung would say the message reaching that person isn't asking them to become selfish, it's asking them to become whole, to let the starving part come back to the table. And I want to speak directly to you for a moment, because if you've been feeling